We must constantly look at things in a different way.
The Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast was created by two physical therapists out of the desire to learn more about the different educational roles in physical therapy and healthcare, and how healthcare education works by talking with educational leaders and people with different perspectives within physical therapy and across interdisciplinary lines on how education can be improved to disrupt the status quo of healthcare education. This is our journey, and thanks for listening. Are you a third-year physical therapy student that excels on tests when you have study guides, checklists, and deadlines? With all of the information available about how to prepare for the NPTE, it's easy to get disorganized and not feel prepared going into the big day. NPTE Prep Success is an online course that provides PT students easy-to-use study guides and step-by-step guidance through the NPTE preparation. To learn more, visit kylericeprep.com. Thank you again all for your continued support, and now for the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. F. Scott Fiel, and I am joined today by a fellow with a very interesting story. It's one that we're kind of seeing more and more of these days. We're seeing a lot of students get into some of these medical programs, and whether it be PT, OT, speech, Chiro, DOs, MDs, and PhDs even, and they're not finishing out the program, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I have the esteemed pleasure to interview Geronimo Bejarano. Am I saying that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Geronimo, go ahead and tell us a little bit about your academic journey and how it's led us to where you're at today.
Yeah, so I went to UCF, University of Central Florida. I did 4 years there in exercise science, got my bachelor's degree, and because I was born in June, I graduated high school at 17, and then I graduated college at 21. And because of how both DC and PT work, you kind of have to apply the year prior for the following year, and I would have been 20, and I definitely didn't know what I wanted to do at that time. So I left my UCF with a bachelor's degree, and I kind of just applied for any rehab science or exercise science jobs that were available. And at that time, I really had no idea about Chiro. Like, I had never been to a Chiro or a PT. I knew that because I played sports, it's kind of what I wanted to do, and that's why I got my exercise science degree. And I'd shadowed PTs before, but I'd never shadowed a DC. But anyways, I got offered a rehab assistant job, is what they called it, for working for a DC, and that was my first kind of introduction to Chiros. And it was exactly what we kind of all hear about DC sometimes. It was like the very pre-post x-ray, when you walk in, long-term care plan. But at that time, I had no idea, right? I had no idea that there was even anything wrong with that. What I really got from those 2 years there was that since I had no mentorship, he was just like, whoever comes back here, you rehab them. It was a lot of reading for me. So I was introduced to a lot of the things that people might be introduced to that first year or two in school. So your McGills, your McKenzies, all of those things. And also all of the people that kind of were telling you to watch out for all of these different weekend seminars, like Greg Layman's, your Ben Cormack's, all of those things I got introduced to way before school even started. And that really became my journey in MSK and how much I fell in love with it. I was also told at the time, and now that I've had all these conversations, I'm not sure how true it is, but that the DC degree allowed you to open up a little easier because PTs maybe weren't point of access or didn't have that, had to get referrals from MD, so it was a little harder to open up. And now I understand that is very state dependent. You probably know a lot more about that than I do. But that is the reason that I chose Chiro over PT, was because even at that time, for those 2 years, I saw enough of the problems of, I don't want to treat like this. I don't want to be forced to treat like this as a new grad. And I definitely don't want to be forced to treat like this 3.5 years with $250,000 of student loan debt, and I don't even like my job. So I was on the whole train of, I'm going to open up right after school. I'm just going to jump through these hoops during school because I was by that time I was aware of the quackier side of Cairo, but I was also told that as long as you jump through the hoops, you could open up and treat how you wanted and make the money that you wanted to make. And that's how I ended up at Cairo.
Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of overlap between PT and Chiro. Chiros, perform a lot of adjustments. PTs like to call manipulations. At the end of the day, it's high velocity, low
Right.
amplitude thrusts. Same basic stuff. We're just calling it kind of different things. Um, Chiro is based a lot more on those adjustments and manipulations, whereas PT has a little bit more exercise related to it. But I've worked with great Chiros and I've worked with terrible Chiros. I've worked with great PTs. I've worked with terrible PTs. So, I mean, it's a matter of just knowing who is ethical, who is, out to get the patient better. There's this ongoing quote unquote battle where PTs and Chiros butt heads, but at the end of the day, there can be a lot of synergy, right? There can be a lot of working together and overlap. And that's fine, I think, if it's done right and if it's done, well. Let's take a look at the bigger picture though here. You mentioned a lot of things that rubbed you the wrong way. What was really the first couple of red flags that went up that got you thinking that, hey, I'm in chiropractor school and yet I don't know if I want to continue that road? Like, what were the first couple things that said, man, I don't know if this is for me after all?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty prepared by the time Cairo school for some of the stuff that was going to happen. It still got very, very quaggy, very fast. I mean, we had a lot of philosophy classes the first 3 semesters. And by philosophy, it's not the philosophy that maybe the people that are listening to this are accustomed to. It's very, the traditional Cairo philosophy of bones go out of place, you put them back in, and there's a higher power, what they call it innate intelligence, kind of flows through you. And, you don't need anything else. You don't need medicine. You don't need anything at all. That is it. As long as you have that, the body that heals itself is basically what they say, which is funny because they don't even acknowledge natural history. But that was really, I didn't think it was going to get that bad, but it for sure was really troubling. But I think the part for me that really kind of opened up my eyes was I was reading a lot of research by that time, and that first semester and beyond, we had a lot of palpation classes, and they were very on the trend of you can palpate anything. Like basically, one of the running jokes is that the way that you get better at palpation is you get a piece of hair and then you put it under a book or a piece of paper, and you feel it. And then once you can feel that, you put another piece of paper or whatever, and then that's how you get better at your palpation skills. So you can palpate these, for them, subluxations. Other people call them joint restrictions, whatever, same thing. And it was really hard for me to grasp that because I was reading all of the palpation literature that basically said we cannot do that, or we just don't have the power. And also, it probably doesn't matter. Like, back pain is so much more complicated than that, even if we could do that. And that was maybe my first or second semester in school. Actually, I shared a picture of a screenshot of an email that I'd sent Greg Lehman about this April 4th. So that meant that I had been in school maybe a month. And I was like, I'm being taught this and I'm not understanding that. And he's like, yeah, that's either Chiro and PT school, right? Because PTs are also taught a lot of this palpation stuff. You just kind of have to get through it. Don't even think about it. He's like, I haven't even thought about it in 15 years. You should stop thinking about it. To stop wasting your time even reading the literature around it because you've got it. That's when I was like, okay, so is everything am I going to be taught something that I have to think about, read about? Like, I have to check my teachers on everything. It's not just these philosophy classes. And that's when it really started to get very frustrating for me.
Yeah, we had Greg on the show a couple years ago, and brilliant guy. Love talking with him. Um, but I think he had a good kind of outlook on things, right? The fact that, like, yeah, some of it's going to be a little bit odd. You're going to be taught a bunch of different things, but at the end of the day, you got to just kind of take it in and then learn the way that you want to learn and practice the way that you want to practice based off that, so I get that. But we're coming to terms now with a lot of outdated research and a lot of things that just simply aren't true that are still being taught in PT school, in Chiro school, probably even in med school as well, if we go that far. My biggest issue is the debt to income ratio that's occurring these days. And, I wrote a book, PT Educator Student Debt Eliminator, to help PTs and clinicians and academicians help pay down their student loans quicker using the skills they were taught in whatever their respective schooling was, to open up more revenue streams for themselves. Because as PT, the median average of debt once they graduate is over 150,000 right now. I've had people, come through my course that are 250,000 in debt right out of graduation. And they're possibly going to be making 65, 75,000 a year as a new grad. So, I mean, it's not a bad job, but at the same time, if you've got $250,000 worth of student loan debt, it's not a great job. That debt to income ratio just isn't there. So talk us through a little bit about some of the financial ramifications that you started thinking about with all of this.
Right. So for me, I've heard a lot of people say that you kind of just have to jump through the hoops and you'll be able to practice how you want at the end. For me, just how you mentioned, when you talk about what that tuition is, I think that we are excusing the schools by saying that. If you were going to charge that much money, so for Chiro school, because there is no state school, every single Chiro school in America is at least $120,000 tuition. Right. There is no, I know UT Austin is like $35,000 for the whole entire program, that really makes PT worth it. Right. And so that's not an option. So it's $120,000 tuition, give or take a couple thousand, depending on what state you're in. And it's lower. The new grad pay is lower than PT new grad pay. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some things that say that your 5 and 10-year pay are going to be higher because most people open up. But most small businesses fail, right? And if you're forcing, Chiro schools, another problem with Chiro schools is they accept a lot more than PT schools. So you are graduating, I don't know, 300 Chiros in a year from a school, and everybody can't open up, right? It's not fair that the only way for you to get a sustainable job is for you to open up eventually. And if you're forcing every single Chiro that graduates to open up and or starve, essentially, you are going to get a lot of care that is low value, a lot of people that are doing it just to try to pay off loans. And to me, that is not healthcare. If you're trying to do things for money instead of for the patients, that's starting to become real unethical at some point. But I get it. I also understand it because I was there. I was in the middle of it, and I was lucky enough to be introduced to some people and well-read enough to say, this is a problem. I need to figure out how I'm not going to give up my I don't know, my values, but what am I going to do about this? Because I also don't want to starve. Like, I went to school so I could make more money than the average person. And so what are we going to do about this? And that was one of the things that in school, I really felt like that failed us, in the sense that, yeah, sure, they taught us good basic science, but after that, they did not warn us about what was the true debt to income ratio that was going to happen, which I think is something that medical school does really well. Obviously, they have way higher pay once you get out of residency, but going into medical school what your debt is going to be, what your income is going to be if you make it all the way through to your past your residency, to fellowship, or to be an attending. And also, they are very intellectual. There's a lot of intellectual humility going on in medical school. Every single one of my friends that did MD are told day one, 50% of the things that you're going to learn in this next 4 years are going to be outdated by the time you get to residency, and the other 50% are going to eventually be outdated. That to me is intellectual humility, and that is a little bit of what I wish for more DC and PT schools. Just let me know that there is a gray area. what is the opposing side to this, especially in the field that we kind of work in, where it's a lot of gray, right? And it's not that simple pathology, or not simple, but like sinister pathology where X comes in and you give them Y, and we have 20 years of RCTs showing that this is what we should do. We don't have that for MSK pain. And I think a lot of the problems that we have in our PT and DC schools are that depending on what school you go to, they'll tell you an answer. And that to me, with the income debt ratio, it's a problem. And I saw APTA, right, put up a post about a week ago or so talking about the Bureau of Statistics put out that it's just, even at 120,000, I think it was, it's just unsustainable for new grad PT pay. The new grad Chiro pay is not only lower, but our debt ratio is around 250,000. So it's higher. It's about almost $100,000 higher than the average PT debt.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, you bring up a lot of really good points there I want to touch on. The first one, that gray area, it's kind of like a running joke in PT school and throughout the PT community that the answer is generally, it depends, right? That's a phrase that we use all the time. Well, it depends. Well, what, the next step is, okay, fine, but why does it depend then?
Right.
Like we have to take that next step to go down that road and figure out, okay, why does it depend? And I think, I'm just starting in academia and I'm just starting to teach now. And again, it took me a while to get to this point to be comfortable enough to go into a job teaching in a system that I felt was flawed and broken. But my own situation and, graduating with 2 doctoral degrees and $140,000 worth of student loan debt really, opened my eyes to, like you said, that debt to income ratio issue, and more the fact that I could leverage the degrees and I could leverage the letters after my name into other things,
Right.
where I felt that PT should just be the tip of my iceberg. And I mean, I've done things as crazy as, I came up with a course for fantasy football injuries. I came up with a course and an ebook for video gamers and esports injuries. Things that interested me, things that I could get behind, passion, projects that I love
Right.
doing. And it didn't matter if I really made any money off them, which I ended up doing. But, it was just a matter of like, wow, like I could do so much with this and so much with these, degrees that are not really related to the degree that, it made me feel like, yeah, I mean, I was even, doing things as far as like digital marketing, and I was learning other skills that I could tie into the healthcare field. And that really put me at ease and let me know that as long as I could leverage it and show my future students how they could leverage it and think outside the box, they didn't have to be in that, world of Shirley Sarmant or Stanley Paris or Mackenzie or any of those, right?
Right.
They're all just kind of thoughts and theories and ways and methods of teaching treatments and stuff, and they all have some validity to them, and they all don't, because like you said, MSK is a wild and crazy world to live in. So if we're looking at weird musculoskeletal stuff, it's not always straight and narrow. And again, I think the financial ramifications of what we were dealing with there was really what got me worried at first. And if I didn't find a way to leverage it, and I was an English major to begin with, so that was a really weird shift for me anyway, to go into science and look at cadavers and all that. So it was a weird place for me to be in. But I think because I have that creative outlet, that I have this desire to like go different directions and get outside the box and step outside of that 9 to 5 clock in, clock out kind of thing. So, it's worked out for me. I just hope it can work out for other people too, in the future. And that's kind of my driving force behind teaching, is that, at least I can open their eyes to there are other possibilities out there. And speaking of other possibilities, tell us a little bit now about your journey and your direction and what you plan to do moving forward.
Right. So I felt the same way that you did. I wanted a degree that essentially allowed me to do more. So the DC degree really doesn't have that weight, especially outside of chiropractic, right? So about a year and a half ago, I got even farther into reading research. So before I only read it from a clinical standpoint, at one point I started to say, I have a lot more questions than answers. And I think a lot of people do, but I found a lot more of the passion and the nuance that maybe clinicians don't have to go that far, right? If you're gonna, like, that's how I tell my friends that definitely want to go into clinical care. Like, you don't need to read some of the stuff that I read, because it's honestly, that is research level stuff, to where you only need to read that if you're about to try to propose a project or try to understand some stuff. And I got really interested in a lot of that, and a lot of social determinants of health. I started to see, so the way that I got into that was that I got really into what's the minimum intervention that we can do for low back pain, or any pain really. And it started to be like walking. Like, walking is just as good as almost anything that we have right now. And so why aren't people walking more? And then that's when I started seeing like the social determinants of health and all of the other things. And I was like, wow, this is goes so much farther than clinical care, just population level health, that community level stuff, eventually policy, and just built environment, and all of these things that kind of affect a person on a day to day, and really limit the choices that people can really make. And it's so much bigger than just regular, I choose to walk more or not. And while I started reading some of that stuff, the pandemic kind of started. So this was last March, and I had a couple of friends that reached out and wanted to be on a project together that ended up getting published. I loved that whole getting onto a Zoom meeting and trying to go through consensus on a paper and what we wanted to write. I really enjoyed that. And then everybody kind of, especially because we were all students publishing it, a lot of people were really reached out, especially the DC PhDs reached out like, this is awesome that you guys are doing this, and got published as all student co-authors. And I got connected with a lot of people that I probably wouldn't have been connected with if I hadn't gotten that paper published. And that allowed me to be part of a couple of projects, even lead a systematic review that we're in extraction right now for, and get on the phone calls with a lot of people all over the world. So I work a lot with Josh Sadro and his team over at University of Sydney, and he connected me with Mary O'Keefe, and we're doing a project as well. So that has really, like, just my passion for that was above and beyond. And at one point I said, I know what I want to do. I want to go get a PhD immediately after I'm done with my DC. Why was I going to do that? Because I thought my clinical degree was always a good backup plan. But I knew with a PhD and with the NIH's loan repayment program that I could do what I wanted. I could also get those loans kind of down. They have a really good program that's like a 50% acceptance rate right now. And it ends up being like they pay off like 100 and something of your thousand of your student loans in 3 years. They just give you there's a direct check from NIH to the loan provider. And it's so I thought, I was like, you know what? I have like about 5 years to leverage this, and then I can apply for that program. And also I'll have my PhD, and I can really do research and maybe even policy work. And so I'm going to set myself up for this. So I started contacting all of the different schools that I thought I would really enjoy. So Duke, UNC is the two schools that I probably talked most with. I had a lot of really good connections with Chad Cook, and him and Mike Ryman have helped me so much throughout all of this process. And Chad has brought me on a couple of projects, and I really thought that Duke or UNC was going to be it for me. My girlfriend actually got offered a job about a month ago in Austin, Texas, that we just couldn't pass up. And it's funny to think about because her salary is higher than the new grad PT or DC salary, and she's got an associate's degree, right? So that and no student loan debt, obviously. And that to me was kind of the breaking point. It was never anything at school that was like, oh, this really broke me. Like I was pretty done with school by that time. Like I was like, you know what, like it is what it is. And I wasn't even really speaking up in class or anything like that. But when she got offered that, I reached out to the people that I've been talking to at UT Austin, and I told them my situation, and they were like, honestly, we can get you in-state tuition here. And I mean, you are in Texas, so you know what in-state tuition is for University of Texas. It's nothing.
Yeah, it's amazing. The in-state tuition here for their programs. And I had I to do it all over again. I'm from New York originally. I would have just stayed I would have gone community college for 2 years, then in-state school for 2 years, finish off the bachelor's, then probably in-state as well for grad school. But I just wasn't thinking at the time. I didn't know. I got
we
sold the
didn't
lie.
know. Yeah, that's another
Gotta
thing
go
is
to the best school, gotta get the best degree, whatever.
right. And so that's kind of how it happened with me. Was I opened up their tuition planner, and I was like, you mean, so because I wasn't going to get a DC, I had to do a master's before a PhD. Their master's PhD. Not all schools are like that. Some schools you can go bachelor's PhD, but their master's PhD, which was fine with me because it's a year and a half, and that's exactly how much time I had left. Essentially, it's adding about 6 months to my PhD time or start date, but it is almost $40,000 less just if I would have finished that last year. So my last year of DC school would have cost me about $46,000 in tuition alone, and a whole entire master's at UT Austin is going to cost about $12,000. And to me, coupled with the fact that if my girlfriend was going to go to Austin, which of course she was, because it's a great job offer, we would have to now be paying two rents instead of one. So you add in the fact that I also wasn't working, so now that's a more student loans that I had to take out, right? So I could pay my rent and stuff like that, plus fly out there. It's like, this is going to be a $70,000 decision, and to me, it was a no-brainer. I don't get me wrong. A lot of people that are in academia will tell you academia is also not easy. It's also not exactly the highest paying job either. A PhD, obviously, it's funny because some people complain about the PhD stipend, which is around 30,000, give or take, depending on where you are. But to me, it was like, they're going to pay me 30,000 instead of me paying 46,000 for a DC degree every year, and then some. Like, it's, we're talking a huge difference, and I still think that PhD should be a higher stipend, of course. But when you come from that DC PT, you're just kind of lucky or you're happy to be there.
Yeah, you're hitting on a lot of high points here that I want to go back and touch on. So first off, I had the very same reaction you did, only for my EDD, right? I figured it would be a good fallback plan in case my clinical work didn't, pan out. And now, as it turned out, things flip flop, and now I'm
Right.
doing that full time, right? But so physical therapy has the physical therapy assistant as well, right? That's a
Mhm.
2-year associate's degree as well, and it's kind of a two-way street, because PTAs are worried that they're going to be outphased and they're not going to be used much anymore. But there's a lot of clinics still using them, and there's a lot of facilities still using them, and you get paid a good portion of a PT salary, not quite as much obviously, but pretty good amount, to have way less debt, only 2 years of school, and way less responsibility too. Your documentation, all you're doing is treatments every day. So your documentation is pretty, simple. So like, when people, especially PTAs, ask, well, should I become a PT? Should I do my transitional program into a PT? And it's like, I don't know. I can't really recommend that from a return on investment standpoint. It's hard to say. I mean, it's different for everybody, right? Everybody's got their own situations. But like, if you're making a pretty good salary right now and you have not that much student loan debt, you'd almost be better off doing something else, like, being a PTA, and then, starting a side business as a personal trainer, or
Right.
a consultant, or something different than getting your doctorate. But then let's take it a step further and now look at academia, and same thing. Like you said, yeah, the pay's not always great, but there are a lot of interesting opportunities there, and it depends, right? State school versus private school. Where I teach,
Right.
University of St. Augustine, it's a private school, so the salary is way more than if it were to be a state school. So it's really actually a great position for me. Like, I have very few qualms about teaching there. The bigger issue is, okay, what am I going to do with this? Now
Right.
that I'm in academia, how do I push the needle forward? How do I get things moving in a direction where I feel like we're making an impact, or that we're changing the world? How are we making things better? Because again, the whole point of this podcast is that academia is kind of a broken system, especially in healthcare. How do we fix that, right? And I've only been teaching now for a little less than a year, so I don't know the answers, right? But we've had all these experts on to talk about how they think it's broken and how they would fix it, and that's been a good starting point, at least. One of the things I want to talk about with you is, you've gone through a partial DC program, right? Um, how now are you feeling as far as like just being at peace and comfortable with your decision to withdraw from a program and go the direction that you're going? Because it sounds like you're set up to do some really great things now on this trajectory. So, at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that can be involved with leaving a program, right? You can feel that guilt, that shame, that like, you know, uh, friends and family and classmates are going to talk about it and blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, how do you feel as far as your comfort level with the decision you've made?
I really feel I felt all of those things that you mentioned, but I felt really comfortable with my decision because of the mentors that I kind of had surrounding the decision. And I had a lot of conversations before the decision was made. And a lot of people, even some of the big time PT PhDs or DC PhDs, have all acknowledged that the system is kind of broken and we're not really allowing people to have a real look at what is going to happen once they graduate. And we are putting a lot of barriers to people be able to practice at the top of their license. A lot of that has to do with the amount of people that we're just graduating. We're just graduating too many people for the amount of jobs that there are. And it's going to become even less as technology kind of starts getting higher and higher. Like Josh Sadro's or postdoc right now is on creating an app that could really help, or hopefully will help, because he's going to do an RCT on it. Uh, People that are getting total knee and total hip replacements after, so they can do all of their rehab through the app. Why is that important in Australia? Because they have a waiting list, right? And so it's a waiting list to see a PT. The problem is that maybe PTs might be wasting their time seeing maybe too many of that total knee, total hip replacement people that kind of could do an app and get better. And there are people that could actually really, really need PT, one-on-one PT care, and they're having to wait, like your really chronic low back pain that has, quote unquote, waited for that natural history, done a lot of things, like they really need to see somebody. They're waiting 12 months to get into a PT in Australia, just the way their healthcare system is set up. So they're trying to find different ways to kind of lower that waiting list for the people that actually need to see PTs. What if that starts happening in America, right? The insurance companies start catching on that some of these websites or some of these walking groups that are kind of taking over in some of these other places, that they're just as good as one-on-one care. And now now there's less jobs, right? And PT schools need to acknowledge, and the APTA acknowledges this, right? They said that on their blog posts a week ago when they talked about the debt to income ratio. Like, before you start another PT school, you really need to think about what you're doing to the profession. And the same thing is really happening to DC schools. And so my big thing was I didn't want to be somewhere where my values were going to start maybe having to take a turn for pay. And so with the PhD, I felt really comfortable with it because of the mentors that kind of allowed to talk me, like they talked me through it, and they told me the different opportunities. And just like how you said, the PhD for me allows me to do things outside of research and academia too. It allows me to leverage the degree to say, hey, I'm really good at managing people. I'm really good at managing my time. Look, I did a whole entire PhD program. If academia doesn't work out for me, or research doesn't work out for me, or whatever, the PhD degree allows me to walk into almost any job. I'm going to be pretty good at statistics. I'll be pretty good at coding, any job. And that's something that Zach Rathorn really told me. Was he was about to finish his PhD, and he's like, if I don't get into the VA postdoc, which he was going to, he's over at Duke. He's like, I'm in the research triangle. Do you know how many technology companies are here that I could go and leverage this PhD to get a job? And that, to me, when he told me that really sunk in. It's like, this degree is not just research, not just academia. I can do so much with this degree that I couldn't do with my DC degree. That it just didn't hold the same amount of weight outside of healthcare. And that allows me to feel a lot more comfortable with my decision. Plus, I don't have to think about student loans anymore, at least taking them out wise. And it was just such an easy decision at that time, and it still is to me. And the more that that kind of Twitter thread that I did went viral, and people started reaching out from all over, just kids that are lost in the system. They made the decision when they were 22, 23 years old, and now they're 100 and something $1,000 in student loan debt. and there's no turning back. They really want to do clinical care, but they also acknowledge the problems. And I think the one that really resonated with me most is the way that we do clinicals and DC degree. It's all at the end. And you're in a student clinic on campus, and then you go out and do your, what they call a preceptorship for about 6 months at any outpatient DC. And we were in that student clinic that the DC school has, like it's their student clinic and you're under the clinicians there. They almost force you to pass down patients. People come in forever, 5-6 years, once a week. And because it's student clinic, it's either really, really cheap or free if you're a government employee. And so like people don't care, right? But at the same time, you're not helping the people, and you're also not helping students kind of get that real life experience. You're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to see anything that you're actually going to see in real life from somebody that comes in once a week for 5 years. They have nothing wrong with them.
Yeah.
They're just coming in for their daily adjustment. And one of the kids told me, "Hey, I really resonate with everything you've said. I've heard you speak in class, all of these things. The worst part about it is I want to be able to help somebody get into self-management, but I haven't been taught how, and I haven't done the reading outside of school." And to me, if you're paying $120,000 and your students don't even know how to get somebody to self-management, you've failed them.
Again, a lot of great points there. I want to bring up a text that I got the other day. Funny that you mentioned the app. It says, "Hi, Scott. Have you heard of Recovery One for Cigna? This is a virtual physical therapy now in your benefits, and it could make each day a little bit better. Press S to sign up for this covered benefit now, or M for more information. Reply X to opt out." So I don't know anything about it. I haven't done the research on it yet, but I just got a text out of nowhere just saying, "Hey, we got this new virtual physical therapy program," and that's coming from Cigna. So the insurance companies are there. They're starting to catch on. They're already putting out their own version of physical therapy through telehealth and telemedicine, which is fine. We've seen that it works a lot of times. However, the insurance companies have been fighting physical therapy for all this time, and now all of a sudden they're on board with it because it's going to make them more money, so it's just a funny circle that we've kind of come into. But again, I want to touch on mentorship a little bit, because that's what saved me as well. I got 2 years into my 4-year EDD and I started worrying again, like, why am I doing this? Why am I throwing more money at this? This is not the direction I need to be heading. What the heck am I going to do with an EDD if I don't want to teach? And again, I had the right mentors. Most of them were business minded. I talked to people in the PT world that were, already opened their own business or had their own online business or whatever. I talked to Greg Todd. I talked to Jerry Durham. I talked to Paul Goff. And, these are guys that I've followed for years, and I just really, truly admire for what they do in the business world. And every one of them had the same thing to say: as long as you leverage your degree and your letters after your name, you'll be fine. You can do whatever you want with them. Just take the knowledge that you gained, take the experiences that you had, and turn them into something productive that'll solve a problem for somebody in the world. And as long as you're the best solution to a problem, people are going to pay you for it. So, I've had consulting job. I have a business where I, kind of did a little bit of injury prevention and wellness education for local businesses, for try to lower their workman's comp costs. Social determinants of health, right? We talked a little bit about that. I've worked with trying to work further upstream and treat before things happen, with a lot of guidance from like Mike Eisenhart and Don Magnuson and Todd Davenport, and there's just so many good people out there doing so much bigger things than clocking in and clocking out and treating 20 patients a day or whatever it may be. That, as long as you take that moment and that pause and listen to what your mentors have to say, they'll lead you in a pretty good direction. And so, I'm happy to hear that's the way you're heading, because it sounds like, again, you just have so many good opportunities, and it's like, to hell with the naysayers, because it only matters what's going to work for you and your family, and how you're going to help, have an impact. And if you didn't feel like you could have an impact, in one direction, and you turned and went another direction, even if it's, doesn't look right to other people and it doesn't seem to make sense to them, it doesn't matter when your big picture. It's, it's hard to see the label when you're inside the bottle, right? So I think you're on the right path, and I'd love for you, if you don't mind, to just give a little bit of advice to those that are maybe thinking about dropping out of a program, or, thinking that maybe they're in the wrong spot, or they're stuck and they don't know what to do. What kind of advice would you give to those folks?
I would say it's the same advice that I give to people that are treating is give that informed consent. And in order for you to give that informed consent, you have to be informed, right? You have to know what you're talking about research wise. And the same thing goes to if you're going to make this decision or you're a little scared about you've listened to this podcast or saw something and talked to somebody that kind of made you doubt, make sure that you do all of the research behind what are the potential next steps, what are the things that really would drive you, but also will make it sense income to debt ratio. And once you find that thing that you're saying, hey, I would love to wake up and do this, and also it might actually pay what I deserve to be paid, go for it. Kind of take that jump and make sure that you talk to the people that are have done it, because if you are, especially if you're in a DC or PT program, there are people that have done so many different things with those degrees, and not just go to a PhD or an EDD or a PsyD, but MBAs, and just completely left healthcare in general. And it's just like, I had no idea until I started asking around and saw people that just went into politics, went into policy work, and I was just like, wow, there's so much you can do that it might be your bigger passion, right? And it doesn't mean that you're kind of giving up on clinical care or anything like that. You're just finding different ways to get to a destination than other people might have, and that's okay too. So for me, the way uh, to a PhD, a lot of people would have gone master's PhD, right, which is eventually what I'm going to do now. But had I finished a DC, there was a lot that I could bring to a PhD table that master students couldn't because of my clinical experience, right? So there, you might think that it's a hindrance for you to have a clinical experience if you're going completely outside of the usual clinical path, but actually there's a lot that you can bring to a table because of your experiences as a clinician or as a student clinician that other people in those areas cannot. And you have a different experiences, and that's something that you should leverage as well. Yeah, sure, you'll have your weaknesses, but also a lot of the strengths that you'll have is a lot of the things that people that go that the typical route for whatever destination you're going to won't have. And I think you should really, really try to leverage that.
Yeah, I think if there's one takeaway word from this entire episode, it's leverage. I think that's the key. That's the take home at the end of the day is whatever you decide to do, as long as you can leverage it, I think
Right.
it's the right choice for you. Well, Geronimo, I want to thank you so much for taking your time to come on and talk with us today about this ever increasing program and systematic issue that we have with healthcare education. But we ask every guest at the end of each episode, if you could change one aspect of higher education, whether it be a DPT or DC, what aspect would you change and how would you change it?
I think I have one that is unreasonable, which is tuition costs, which it's just so unreasonable. But the
That's
one that I
actually
think,
the number one given answer is cost. So you're
yeah,
right on with that one.
but
And you say unreasonable, but realistically, I mean, look at inflation over the last 20 years. It's gone up 3% every year. Education's gone up 8 to 14% every year. So how is that unreasonable? Like, we just need to pull it back in a little and be like, no, 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 this isn't going to work. There has to be some sort of legislature that puts a cap on that or something, because it's getting out of hand.
right. I think the way that I was kind of phrasing reasonable is something that could change on Monday. And that to me is, or well, today's Monday, but that could change right now, is that to me is that informed consent that I'm talking about, like that intellectual humility, that teachers kind of walking in first semester for these students and being like, this is what the actual outlook is. Hey, you're going to be this much in debt. This is what the normal, like sitting down with these first semester students or hopefully even before and being
I was going to
honest.
say that may go further back, even high school. We need
Right.
to let them know, even if you're going to go to college, totally cool. Think it's, not for
Right.
everybody, but most people want to go to college. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's state versus private. Here's what happens when you take out the loans, right? If you don't have the
Right.
money to pay for it. Here's how that's going to affect you later on in life. Okay. Buying a house, buying a car, like those things are going to
Exactly.
come into play. And I never had that education, and
Nope.
I just feel like, my economics class was, basically supply and demand, and that was it, right? Like, that's your business savvy. That's not good enough, right? We need to teach general basic, economics to students as far as like real world, cashing a check, what a credit card means, like all these things that they're going to need in the real world. We need more of that earlier on, I think, in our curriculum.
Yeah, I think schools right now kind of throw it to the side because they have a mandatory like little video mod that you have to do when you take out student loans. And let's be honest here, nobody's watching those 3-minute videos from studentloans.gov. They're just waiting for the time clicker to go down and you're just clicking it through. You need to kind of inform people with that about what the decision you're making. And that's not to, I think either of us are saying don't go the PT or don't go the DC route. Well, I'll tell you, if you can go stay school PT, definitely go stay school PT route. But what it is it's you're informing people, right? Like people are still going to want to be PTs and DCs. Like clinical care is still something that really drives a lot of people, and it should, because it's really valuable work and it is needed for a lot of things. But you need to make sure that people are informed about the decision that they're making, because if not, it's almost predatory that people come out and they have no idea, especially at the age that a lot of people are coming in, 22 years old. Like, you just don't know. You're like, oh, cool, I got into a doctorate program of being able to treat people, or especially athletes at the beginning, right? Everybody wants to treat athletes. Like, I might be able to treat an athlete one day and all these things. And it's like, it's unfair what we're doing to students and putting in a position where we're just creating this, or adding to this problem of bad healthcare and low value care. And I understand why. Like, it's a lot of debt. There's a lot of debt, and I get it. And so I think that's something that everybody could do on tomorrow, is make sure that your students understand what they're getting themselves into. And I don't think, and it's, if some people kind of leave, that might be a good thing. And the people that stay are really gonna be determined to figure out ways to make it work and have at least those 3 years in school to kind of set themselves up for when they come out to make it work.
Yeah. Great advice. Well, Geronimo, thank you so much for your time and for coming on and kind of telling your story for our audience. I think that'll be very helpful for any of those that may be unsure or unclear or sitting on the fence. Where can people reach out to you if they want to follow up with you or just see what you're up to these days, whether it be email or social media? We'll throw it in the show notes. Yeah,
Twitter is the best bet. That's what honestly, if you're a PT or DC student, go on there. It is amazing what you could find on there. Like, you find the big time researchers, big time clinicians, just kind of talking things through on there. I really recommend going on there. It was a blessing for me. And so I'm Gero5, Gero5 on there. And if at any point any student wants to reach out and kind of talk things through, I'm always available. I had that from my mentors and from the people that I kind of reached out to. And I would love to be able to help some students out for whatever they need, because I've been there. And a lot of people have been there. And I think that's something that you guys should all remember, is that a lot of people have gone through exactly what you're going through, and they can really help, or at least be someone to listen to.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time again. And yeah, we're going to be neighbors soon, so we'll have to grab a drink, get together and grab a drink sometime, man. I look forward to it.
Me too.
All right, bud. Have a good one and best of luck in the future.
You too. Thank you.
Access to healthcare is one of the largest issues facing both providers and patients, as millions of people worldwide lack timely and affordable access to healthcare. Anywhere Healthcare, a telehealth platform, is a simple, low-cost option for providers and patients that eliminates the barriers to access to all kinds of healthcare. To find out more, check out anywhere.healthcare, which is available on our show notes. And if you use the code HET in all caps when you email to sign up, you'll save 25% off the total cost. Thank you for attending class today, and we hope that you learned something and gained value from the content.
If you'd like to schedule office hours with us, feel free to add us on Twitter at HET Podcast, on Instagram, HET Podcast, on Facebook, the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast, and the homepage, healthcareeducationtransformationpodcast.com.
And for those of you following along in the syllabus, extra credit can be obtained by liking us, sharing us, and leaving a review.
Let's continue our journey up Mount Educational Success as lifelong learners.